A warm, rainy day welcome to everyone. My name is Mickey Andina, and on behalf of the Women's Fund and our esteemed panel, I would like to thank you for joining our discussion of immigrant stories and America's promise. We have an informative and inspiring session planned and hope you will learn more about U.S. immigration and about the Immigrant Legal Defense Center, who in 2020 received a $65,000 Women's Fund grant. During the next hour, we'll have a mix of panel discussion, videos, and live questions and answers. Please feel free to submit your questions anytime during the presentation via the question and answer function, and we will answer as many as we can during the last 10 to 15 minutes of the session. It is now my honor to introduce our dynamic panel, who, except for me, you will notice are all young women. Maria Vega is the staff attorney for Immigrant Legal Defense Center. Julissa Peña is the executive director of Immigrant Legal Defense Center. And Claribel Madueña is an attorney and specialist on immigration and nationality law who is joining us from the Bay Area. She has been a mentoring attorney since the beginning of ILDC. And again, I'm Mickey Andina, a public health nurse and anthropologist currently on the research committee of the Women's Fund. Let's begin with Claribel and a brief history of U.S. immigration policy. So Claribel, while waiting for this session to start, we all read the very familiar Emma Lazarus poem that is on the Statue of Liberty and listened to the stirring New World Symphony composed in 1893 by Anton Dvorak, an immigrant from Russia. For me, as the daughter of immigrants, this poem just really touches my heart and represents what America is at its core, a nation of immigrants willing to welcome those tired, poor, and huddled masses yearning to breathe free. As someone who has dedicated your education and life to representing immigrants in legal proceedings, can you help us to better understand how U.S. immigration has become such a divisive issue?
Thank you, Mickey. Yes, the poem is incredibly moving, and like you, I am also the daughter of immigrants. My family immigrated to the U.S. from Central America, and speaking both professionally and personally, I know that immigrants truly love the United States and view it as the land of opportunity. Unfortunately, America does not always return that sentiment. As you mentioned, the last 4 years have been particularly divisive. For example, we've witnessed children being separated from their parents at the border and the banning of immigrants from predominantly Muslim countries. While these tactics shock the conscience, American immigration policies have always alternated between welcoming and exclusionary. This is not a rationalization, but rather it provides historical context. And as we review the push and pull of American immigration policy today, please keep in mind that on the left-hand side of the slides that you'll see will reflect the welcoming policies, while the right-hand side reflects the restrictive policies. So years before Christopher Columbus ever stepped foot in the Americas, the expansive territory was inhabited by Native Americans. All those that came after are immigrants. By the time America gains its independence in 1776, we have an estimated population of about 2.5 million. The Declaration of Independence cements America's image as the land of the free, but not for everyone. The Naturalization Act only grants American citizenship to free whites, excluding millions of Native Americans and slaves. So now we get into our first immigration wave. During this time, the Irish come to the US fleeing famine and religious persecution. Many of them are Catholic. This wave causes a large demographic shift in the United States from 1820 to 1860. As a reaction to this influx of immigration, the first anti-immigrant party, the Know Nothing Party, is formed. And this will be the first time we see kind of anti-immigrant sentiment. But as we head into the next 3 decades, we begin a booming period of industrialization, urbanization, and a second immigration wave begins. Many come to the US because it's seen as the land of economic opportunity. Over 20 million immigrants arrive from Southern, Eastern, and Central Europe, and a steady stream of immigrants arrived from China as well. However, in the 1870s, we start to hit hard economic times. Keep in mind that the Civil War ended in 1865, and it was the costliest and deadliest war ever fought on American soil. European immigrants and Americans begin to compete for the jobs traditionally reserved for the Chinese, even though the Chinese immigrants only make up about 0.002% of the US population. Nonetheless, anti-Chinese sentiment grows, and the US enacts the Chinese Exclusion Act, which suspended immigration for 10 years and declared Chinese immigrants ineligible to become US citizens. And in 1892, we have the creation of Ellis Island, which formalizes the immigration process and ushers in another wave of immigration. However, around the time immigration peaks in 1907, prejudices against the Japanese are high in California. Schools are being ordered to be segregated at that time as well. White workers believe that Japanese workers are taking all the farming jobs and depressing wages. As such, the US and Japan signed what's called the Gentleman's Agreement, limiting immigration from Japan to business professionals. You'll notice that the theme of immigrants as a threat re-emerges, and 2 years after the Gentleman's Agreement, the first wall between the United States and Mexico is built in 1909. Now, as we enter World War I, xenophobia is at an all-time high, and there are no welcoming immigration policies, as you'll notice. Indeed, we only see restrictive laws, such as the Immigration Act of 1917, which created a literacy requirement for immigrants, effectively stopping immigration from mostly Asian countries. Then we have the Immigration Act of 1924, which created a strict quota system that favored immigration from Northern and Western European countries. Great Britain, Ireland, and Germany accounted for 70% of all available visas. This in turn caused a spike in illegal immigration, which leads to the creation of the US Border Patrol. As we leave World War I and enter World War II, the pendulum starts to swing again with immigration policy, and the US begins to approach immigration more humanely. Foreign labor helps the US during labor shortages, and America once again welcomes refugees. One of the most iconic policies of the time is the Bracero program, which allowed Mexican agricultural workers to enter the US temporarily to work. The program lasted 22 years until 1964. Family reunification also becomes a key tenet of immigration policy.
So Clarabelle, excuse me for interrupting you, but I see everything here is on the left side saying that our policies during that period of time were quite welcoming. However, I personally know from my own family story that my mother, and who was a Jewish refugee from Germany, was unable to enter the United States. She had to wait for over 2 years in South America before she was allowed to enter. So sort of like what's been happening recently, where people are being forced to wait outside of the United States before coming in.
Yes, that's a good point, Mickey. And there still exist contradictions within the policies, right? And I believe what you were referring to is the MPP, the policy where it's the migrant protection policy, where individuals seeking asylum are being forced to wait in camps in Mexico. So as we move into the next decades, more protection to immigrants is offered, especially to those fleeing war-torn countries, communism, and natural disasters. A part of American society acknowledges the contributions made by undocumented immigrants, but we also begin to experience another shift towards limiting immigration. Ironically, the Berlin Wall falls in 1989, but in the US, there's a big push for building the wall at the US-Mexico border in 1990. And then, of course, we experienced 9/11. which completely transforms the US immigration system. The Office of Homeland Security is created and is now one of the largest organs of the federal government. They're charged with preventing terror attacks, border security, immigration and customs, disaster relief, and prevention and other related tasks. Similarly, in 2003, ICE, or Immigrations and Customs Enforcement, is created. And as mentioned in the beginning of the presentation, we have endured a very restrictive immigration era in the past 4 years. Many discriminatory and exclusionary policies have been implemented and have had a harmful impact on immigrants, especially immigrants from communities of color. Not only has immigration into the US been restricted, but certain rights and remedies have been stripped from immigrants currently living in the US. As immigration advocates, this has had a detrimental effect on how we fight for these communities. However, as we transition to a new administration, the pendulum has already begun to swing in a more welcoming and hopeful direction. President Biden has put forth a very bold immigration plan, but it will be an uphill battle. And in closing, when we think about immigration, it's important to remember that America has long been a nation of immigrants, and our tapestry of cultures, races, and customs beautifully reflect that. However, attitudes towards new immigrants by those who came before them have oscillated between welcoming and exclusionary throughout history. American immigration policy mirrors these attitudes. And while we have been steeped in a restrictive and even punitive era the last 4 years, we must have faith that America will once again embrace immigrants and progress towards a more equitable system. Mr. Rogers reminds us that in times of crises, we must always look for the helpers. The Immigrant Legal Defense Center has been a beacon of hope for many as the staff and volunteers have worked tirelessly to help the most vulnerable immigrants in Santa Barbara County. They are truly an inspiration. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much, Clarabelle, for that really enlightening and informative review of U.S. immigration history. There is a lot for all of us to learn in what you've presented already. So I would now like to introduce Julissa Peña, who I've had the honor to get to know since we began working together in 2019 on the ILDC application to the Women's Fund. Julissa, Clarabelle has just given us this amazing overview of U.S. immigration history and policy at the national level. And now I'd like to speak specifically with you about the situation in Santa Barbara County. Do you actually know how many undocumented people are living in South Santa Barbara County? And what does it actually mean to be undocumented?
Great questions. Thank you, Mickey. There are approximately 46,000 immigrants in Santa Barbara, South County. About 10,000 of them are undocumented. That means that 1 in every 4 immigrants is undocumented. Many people are undocumented because they entered the US without inspection or because they overstayed their visas.
Are they all at risk for deportation? And how many approximately are currently in what you guys call removal proceedings, which actually just means that they've received a notice to appear in immigration court? Is that correct?
Correct, Mickey. When you have to go to immigration court, that means that the government is trying to deport you, and you must defend yourself in court. There are currently 1,472 people in deportation proceedings in Santa Barbara County, and nearly half of them are without representation. The ILDC has a wait list of 80 individuals in deportation proceedings, and almost half are from Santa Barbara, South County. The mission of the ILDC is to provide our immigrant neighbors with equal access to justice and due process through pro bono representation. ILDC started operating in March 2018 in response to expanded enforcement of ICE that increased the number of immigrants at risk of being placed in deportation proceedings and the absence of free or low-cost deportation defense assistance in Santa Barbara County. We started with a volunteer attorney model in 2018, training, recruiting volunteer attorneys who were not immigration law practitioners. However, due to the complexity of removal defense cases and the limited availability of mentoring immigration attorneys, we decided to fundraise to hire a staff attorney who could help us expand what was a very limited program. Thanks to the Women's Fund grant, we were able to hire our first staff attorney, Maria Vega. In the following video, you will hear directly from Maria and learn more about our removal defense program and the impact that the Women's Fund grant had in the expansion of our program.
My name is Maria Vega. Thanks to you, I am the first staff attorney at the Immigrant Legal Defense Center, the ILDC. I am the daughter of immigrants, the first in my family to graduate from high school, college, and law school. My parents came to this country before I was born, and I was able to witness firsthand their journey to adjust their immigration status. I knew I wanted to be a community advocate from a very young age. Some of my earliest memories are me serving as an interpreter, not only for my monolingual Spanish-speaking parents, but for our family and friends who also needed assistance. As I grew older, I realized I genuinely enjoyed being that bridge between my community and seemingly complicated information. This particularly rang true in my parents' own immigration process when their immigration attorney did not speak any Spanish. It was up to me to communicate my parents' concerns, frustrations, and fears. I was 8 years old, but there was no other choice. I grew up in Santa Maria, California. In 2008, I moved to pursue my bachelor's degree, and in 2014, I moved again to attend law school. After law school, I took the Washington State Bar exam and lived in Washington for a few years after that, working with the immigrant community in Central Washington, representing folks in immigration and family law cases. After marrying my husband in 2019, I decided I wanted to move back to California. I specifically wanted to move back to the Central Coast, a place that has always been home to me. But I knew I wanted to come back and continue working with immigrant communities here in my hometown. Unbeknownst to me, during the same time, the Women's Fund awarded the ILDC a grant to partially fund a staff attorney's salary. I learned of this opportunity and quickly applied. I was excited to know of the work of the ILDC. The ILDC is the only organization in Santa Barbara County of its kind. Unlike other organizations that offer immigration legal aid, the ILDC is the only organization that offers removal defense help for folks in need. And I am thrilled to say that as of June of this year, I joined the ILDC team, and it is all thanks to supporters like you. Our current goal at the ILDC is to tackle the 100+ person waitlist of folks who are waiting for legal representation in their immigration removal case. We are looking to multiply the amount of cases the ILDC has been able to historically take. Prior to me joining the ILDC, our program was able to assist our clients based solely on the generosity of our volunteer attorneys who donate their time and take cases pro bono. Although we are still operating under the same structure, and even though there have been multiple restrictions because of COVID-19, I am happy to announce that since joining the ILDC about 4 months ago, we have already doubled our caseload, and we are working so those numbers increase. I am also thrilled to announce that the majority of my caseload is composed of women and children who are seeking to remain in this country safe from outer circumstances that threaten their lives. Again, this is all thanks to donors like you. I kindly encourage you to continue supporting programs like the Women's Fund and the ILDC. This work is so important, and we are only able to carry out our missions because of donors like you. In addition, I also encourage you to use your talents and time to further our missions. We are always looking for doctors and counselors and psychologists and expert witnesses to support our cases. We also look for folks who are willing to drive people to their court appearances. There's really so much you can do. And from the bottom of my heart, I thank you for supporting immigrants in our community. Sí se puede.
Maria is amazing, and I'm really sorry that she couldn't be with us today, but she just gave birth to a baby boy. So Maria ended with the word sí se puede, meaning yes, you can. Yes, we can help. Yes, it's possible to make a difference in the lives of our immigrant neighbors. We welcome anyone interested in helping to please include your name and email in the question and answer, or you can reach out directly to ILDC to offer your services. We'll post ILDC's contact information at the end of today's presentation. So Julissa, based on your work with ILDC for the past 2 years, what do you see as the primary challenges facing immigrants in Santa Barbara County?
Yeah. The lack of affordable legal services and pro bono representation for immigrants in removal proceedings is one of our greatest immigration challenges. Unlike our criminal justice system, immigrants in removal proceedings are not appointed government counsel. According to the Transactional Records Access Clearinghouse, the single most important factor in determining outcome in cases involving mothers and children is whether or not they are represented. The odds of being allowed to remain in this country are 14 times greater if women and children have representation. Another major challenge is the criminalization of immigrants through immigration detention centers, exposing immigrants to brutal and inhumane conditions of confinement at massive costs to American taxpayers. Mothers, children, and unaccompanied minors fleeing violence and poverty in their home countries pose no threat to the community, and yet they have been detained in immigration prisons. In the midst of a pandemic, this has resulted in the collision of public health and U.S. immigration policy. To help everyone better understand this challenge, I like to share the next video about 2 current ILDC clients. Gloria and her son Alejandro are from poor rural town in southern Mexico. She's married to a man deeply entrenched in a violent drug cartel. She lived with her husband for over a decade and was subjected to physical and mental abuse, including routine spousal rape. Contrary to many domestic violence victims in the US, Gloria was unable to obtain help from other people in her town or even the authorities. All feared her husband and the reach of the cartel. When Gloria managed to escape with her 2 children and relocate to a large city 300 miles away, her husband found her a year later. He demanded she return to him. When Gloria resisted, he kidnapped their 10-year-old daughter and threatened to come back for her and their younger son, Alejandro. Gloria's personal story will challenge a number of immigration myths and show the vulnerability of immigrant women of color to male violence and to an immigration system that is very much enforced by men.
Lo que más me duele que yo me vine sin despedirme de nadie, de ninguno de mis hermanos ni de mi mamá. Yo no sé dónde agarré valor, pero agarré a mi hijo y me vine. Más que nada dejé a mi familia y a mi hija en México. Viajé en avión a Tijuana. En Tijuana estuve en un albergue. Tardé casi un poquito más de un mes estando en Tijuana esperando un turno que nos dieron cuando yo llegué y yo fui la número 375, eran de 10 en 10, entonces se me hizo mucho esperar, pero no me quedó de otra por mi situación. Todo ese tiempo yo estuve escondida, estuve con mucho miedo. Entonces yo tardé más de un mes esperando mi turno. Yo me levantaba a las 5 de la mañana y me iba a la línea para ver cuántas personas podían meterse de este lado. Hasta que me tocó mi turno. Estuvimos todo el día en la línea, estaba yo todo el día desde las 5 de la mañana hasta las 7 de la tarde, casi ya oscuras. Y si a mí me hubieran dicho, te tienes que quedar aquí para que esperes tú tu turno, yo me hubiera quedado a dormir ahí. Cuando logré entrar, que me tocó mi turno, entramos, pero fue muy difícil también porque el trato no fue muy bueno. Gracias a Dios a mi niño no lo desapartaron de mí, pero a muchas personas desapartaron a sus hijos de ellos, de las señoras, y pues fue una situación muy difícil también porque estábamos encerrados en 4 paredes, sin ventanas, sin nada. El baño estaba en el mismo cuarto, todo muy antihigiénico, muchas cosas malas. Dormíamos en el piso, con mucho frío, prendían el aire a una temperatura muy alta. Sí sufrimos mucho también en ese lugar porque no mirábamos la luz del sol, no mirábamos nada, estábamos encerrados como animales. Cuando logré entrar, lo recuerdo muy bien, mi corazón sentí a la vez un alivio y a la vez se me partía en dos. ¿Por qué? Por todo lo que me había pasado y por haber dejado a mi hija atrás. Cuando entramos a Estados Unidos, mi primera impresión fue, no me trataron muy bien entrando porque en primera miran a los inmigrantes como criminales, como si todos hubiéramos hecho algo malo en México. Lo cual no es así. Hay muchas personas que venimos huyendo por algo muy difícil. No todos somos criminales, no todos somos delincuentes, como el mismo presidente lo dice. Y si tomamos esa decisión de venir a este país, como fue mi decisión, fue por estar bien, por tener un poco de tranquilidad. Si yo no me hubiera venido a este país, yo pienso que en este momento yo ya no existiera, ya no. El centro legal a inmigrantes me ha ayudado muchísimo, muchísimo desde que yo conocí a estas personas. Para mí fueron como mis ángeles, fue una bendición de yo haberlas conocido, porque en primera yo no tenía un abogado que me representara en mi corte, que fueron las primeras personas que me apoyaron, que me dieron la mano, que me han estado ayudando hasta ahorita, porque un abogado aquí cuesta muchísimo dinero. Mi deseo principal aquí en los Estados Unidos para mi familia es que mis niños estén bien, que mis hijos estén bien, que estén bien de salud. Yo solamente quiero estar tranquila en este país y que me dejen estar aquí con mis hijos. Y ojalá que pudiéramos tener más oportunidades las personas inmigrantes, porque sí sufrimos mucho, más que nada las mujeres sufrimos mucho porque somos como que más vulnerables a no tener oportunidades para poder salir adelante. Que yo sé que este país es muy bueno y solo les pido que nos ayuden, que nos apoyen en ese aspecto, que nos den una oportunidad para demostrar que no somos personas malas, que solamente queremos estar bien con nuestros niños aquí en este país. nada más.
Oh, deep breath. This is every time I hear that video, it really touches me, and I just feel that Gloria is such an incredible profile in courage. During my own professional career as a nurse anthropologist, I worked in 26 countries, and the strength and resilience of women never ceases to amaze me. I really hope that Gloria's case will soon have a happy ending. I just would like to comment that I want to thank those people who have already put their names and emails in the chat box, volunteering to help ILDC. That's really, really exciting. Thank you so very much. And before we begin answering questions from the audience, I personally am very curious, what are the most common myths that we hear about immigrants? So I'm gonna either Julissa, Clarabelle, you guys just get to dive in and take it away.
I'll let Clarabelle start.
Thank you, Mickey. So one of the most common myths is that immigrants don't contribute to the economy or pay taxes. However, the numbers show otherwise. The total annual contribution of foreign-born workers is roughly $2 trillion. Critical sectors of the US economy, from agriculture to technology, rely on immigration. Working age immigrants positively contribute to our communities and economy. In 2015, the IRS collected $23.6 billion from 4.4 million workers without Social Security numbers, many of whom were undocumented immigrants. According to New American Economy, which is a bipartisan research and advocacy organization, undocumented immigrants contributed $13 billion into the Social Security funds in 2016 and $3 billion to Medicare. In 2013, it was estimated that undocumented immigrants contributed $12 billion into Social Security. Undocumented immigrants quietly pay billions into Social Security and receive no benefits in return. Unfortunately, the undocumented worker is vilified, while the employers hiring them are mostly ignored. Undocumented immigrants caught in workplace raids face deportation and even criminal charges. But overall data shows that criminal prosecutions of employers who knowingly hire undocumented workers are rare. And most that are convicted receive little more than token punishment. This actually leads me into my next myth, and that is that immigrants are dangerous criminals. This plays directly into the way American agencies, how they treat immigrants, which in turn influences the way society views immigrants. However, statistics show that foreign-born residents of the United States commit crime less often than native-born citizens. For example, foreign-born individuals are less likely than US-born individuals to have engaged in violent or non-violent antisocial behaviors in their lifetimes, including harassment, assault, and acquiring multiple traffic violations. According to a study published by the University of Wisconsin-Madison, US citizens were twice as likely to be arrested for violent felonies in Texas from 2012 to 2018 compared to undocumented immigrants. US citizens are also 2.5 times more likely to be arrested for felony drug crimes. And US citizens are over 4 times more likely to be arrested for felony property crimes. And yet, our immigration system treats immigrants like dangerous criminals. You heard from Gloria, her testimony about how she was treated when she came to the United States. Immigrants are detained. They must post a bond to get out. And when they are released from detention, they are monitored as if they were on parole or probation. Some must wear uncomfortable ankle monitors. And the question is, why is this necessary? It seems to serve no other purpose than to traumatize and dehumanize immigrants. Many often say, oh, well, they're breaking the law, but it's important to note here that immigration laws are civil laws in nature. They are not criminal laws.
Yes, Mickey, I would like to add one more harmful myth that I often hear, which is that undocumented immigrants should wait in line outside the US in order to immigrate here, or should fix their status after entering. Most people immigrate to the US through one of three routes. That's family relationships, job offers, or humanitarian grounds. Both family and employment-based immigration are limited to strict quotas. For example, if you are a US citizen sponsoring a sibling that lives in Mexico, your Mexican sibling will have to wait 22 years in line before getting a visa.
Wait, but I thought family reunification was a basic tenet of US immigration policy.
That's the case for a lot of people. And that's Gloria's case. Gloria is seeking asylum because her sister, her matter was urgent. Her sister, she could not wait 22 years to get sponsored. Another example, the U visa, which is a special visa for crime victims who cooperate with local law enforcement in the US, is limited to 10,000 visas per year. But there's a 6-year backlog. If you file in 2014, your case won't get approved until 2020. Thank you so much. These are great myths, and I'm so glad that you guys had the evidence to dispel them. So now we have a very sophisticated system here for answering questions. Basically, I'm getting by telephone the questions that are coming up, so I'm not having to read the chats. So I'm going to start with one of the early questions that came in. It was actually directed toward me, which is how my parents got to America and did they have permission? And my parents got to America on a boat from Europe they ended up going to Chile. They tried to apply while they were still in Europe. When they then fled, they had no replies whatsoever. So the only place they were allowed into was Chile at the time. And then they sat in Chile for 2 years waiting to receive the formal permission to be allowed to come. They were part of the Jewish immigration, the refugee quota, but there was a very strict quota and the numbers were very, very limited. So a lot of people had to wait outside at that time. So just indication of, some of these policies are not new, what we've been seeing. They've been more draconian, but they're not really new. Then for Julissa, I'm going to combine here a couple of the questions because I think you can answer them logically together. The first one is, how do your clients find you? And then, has ILDC had success when arguing immigrants' cases? Okay, so the first one. So our first program is offering pro bono representation to immigrants in removal proceedings. Our second program is our community education program, which goes out to the community, wherever our immigrant community is at, and lets them know of their basic civil rights should they encounter ICE, right? And so that they can learn how they can protect themselves from that, because 90% of the cases, ICE arrests immigrants without a search warrant signed by a judge. And so through these education presentations that we hold in the community, at schools, at the agricultural fields, we've been able to connect with our immigrant community and let them know about the services that we offer should they need them. And the second question, Mickey, I already forgot.
That's okay. So what success have you had when arguing immigrants' cases?
Oh my goodness. So we are super new still. So again, we started operating in March 2018 because of COVID, because of the huge amount of cases. There's a huge backlog. And so all the cases that
take forever to get through the system too, don't they? I mean, how long has Gloria been?
Gloria has been 2 years. 2 years.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so Gloria's probably going to be the first case that we hear from, because her merits hearing is scheduled in July. So in July, we'll find out if she's granted asylum or not. and we'll make sure to let you all know.
But even the representation is important, right, Clarabelle? I mean,
oh, absolutely. You know, it's been really difficult these last 4 years. A lot of the tools that we as advocates had available to us have been taken away from us just through Department of Justice policies. And even for the judges, tools have been taken away from them too. They can't exercise their own discretion in granting a continuance, for example, to allow for preparation time. But it's hard for us as attorneys to show up in court and still fight within the system and win. And now if someone is completely unrepresented, the chances of them winning are slim to none.
Right, right. Another question that came in is, as we all know, many of the people who are immigrants have multiple issues that they are facing. So has ILDC been able to partner with other local resources for domestic violence shelters, jobs, English literacy, financial literacy, food banks, childcare, medical assistance, etc.?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, oh my goodness. All of our clients face intersectional needs, and we are part of the 805 Immigrant Coalition, composed of other immigrant serving organizations. And so we often refer our clients to these organizations and other local organizations to help them meet those intersectional needs. Although I have to say that locally, we don't have enough resources to meet the intersectional needs of immigrants of color. Affordable housing is one of the biggest challenges our clients face. Most of the families we serve, if not all, are crammed up in one-room rentals, paying more than 50% of their income in rent. It's ridiculous.
So another question is, are there resources in town to assist with the affirmative citizenship filings with the immigration courts or with right to work documents?
Yes, we have Importa and we have Immigrant Hope that offers affirmative immigration assistance. And yes, that's it.
Okay, good. And then one other question, which actually I know that we answered when we made the presentation last year to the Women's Fund, but you should still explain it as best you can. How will ILDC support the lawyer position this next coming year? Because the Women's Fund grant is only 1 year.
That's a great question. So we hope to become eligible. We will be eligible for state funding when we meet our 3 years in operation. So we will be in operation. I mean, in 2022, it'll be 3 years that we're in operation. And so we can apply for state funding. And that's how we hope to support Maria. Yeah.
Because the state is funding organizations like yours to do this kind of work, right?
Yes.
And you get a certain amount of money per case that you're handling. Is that correct?
That's right. So the California Department of Social Services has an immigration services program where they fund removal defense programs, organizations that have a removal defense program. And so they would give us about $5,000 to $6,000 per case that we retain. It covers partially some of those costs, but it helps tremendously. Yeah. At the moment, we're not receiving any state funding help.
Right. Yeah. So here's another question for you, Julissa. Is assuming you have more clients than you can handle, how do you screen for clients that you accept for representation?
Oh, that's a great question. So,
smart audience here, let's face it.
Yeah, I mean, if we had the capacity to help everyone in deportation proceedings, we would, because we believe that everyone deserves equal access to justice and due process. But we know that women and children are the most vulnerable, and so we've been prioritizing on women and children.
So another question here is, what are you most hopeful will happen under this new administration? This is a biggie.
This is a big question, and I'm gonna answer, and then I'm gonna have Clarabelle add, because I'm sure she has some thoughts. But Oh my God, the reversal of all the harmful immigration policies and regulations that took place in the last 4 years, and really creating a pathway to citizenship for the nation's 11 million undocumented immigrants. I think Clarabelle spoke very well of the advantages that immigrants pose to this country's future. Yeah. So, Clarabelle, you want to add anything?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you know, it's going to, as I mentioned before, it's going to be an uphill battle getting immigration reform, especially with the razor thin majority that Democrats have. However, just off the top of my head, things that I would like to immediately be implemented. I mentioned tools that have been taken away from advocates for individuals facing deportation in court. Certain things that we were able to do, for example, sometimes if you're during the Obama administration, and I have my criticism about, you know, how he was the deporter in chief, don't get me wrong, but what Obama did is that he created an enforcement priority system. So there was a tiered system about, okay, we have limited resources. How are we gonna focus our resources in order to deport certain people, right? So they focused on, of course, you know, terrorism. That's never, you know, you're always barred if there's any suspicion of that. But let's say immigrants with hardcore criminal records, and they, you know, so they prioritize individuals with criminal records. They prioritize individuals who had old deportation orders or multiple, you know, re-entries into the United States. So there were enforcement priorities.
Yeah.
Trump came into office, they were like, get rid of the priorities, let's deport all 11 million. And that's just unrealistic. Practically speaking, you don't have the resources to do that. And so it was kind of just a scatterbrained approach, but as part of Obama's kind of policy, focusing on the more hardcore criminals and that type of thing, what we were able to do in court as practitioners was request what's called prosecutorial discretion from the government, which means the government agencies, they have so much power, they have all the cards. And so in certain cases, I had many cases where an individual has been in the United States for like 20 years, they have kids born here, they're undocumented, they've been paying taxes, they have no crimes, but they were caught up in immigration and now they're in deport proceedings. So the government said, okay, you know what, we're gonna pause your case, kind of freeze it, forget about you, and put it away. So they would close the cases out using their prosecutorial discretion, saying, you're not our priority. So that alone would be great to reinstitute that policy, give judges the tools, the administrative tools that they used to have to manage their dockets, and to be able to be the neutral arbiter and not have to kind of play Department of Justice role in deporting these individuals. So just those alone would be super helpful and come on a path for DACA, you know.
Really important, yeah. So following on this whole discussion that you just led into, I know Julissa is going to be very happy to answer this question, but she has a very strict time limit to answer it, okay? But I know you're going to be really excited with this question that came in. We've heard a lot about the role played by our sheriff in supporting ICE. Please comment.
That's a great. Oh my goodness, 2 minutes. So every year there's a Truth Act forum, right, where the sheriffs has to report to a county of supervisors, right, if they've handed over any immigrants to ICE. The ILDC, you know, is advocating for immigrants and wanting sheriffs to end all entanglement with ICE, because in doing so, right, it creates this distrust with the community that it serves, right? And so it is really, remember, sheriffs is an elected official. You know, he's gonna run for office again in 2022. Make sure you go out there and vote and you protect the immigrant community, because no local law enforcement agencies should be working with ICE whatsoever. ICE has its resources. If they want to go out and get someone, they can go get them. There's no need for local law enforcement to entangle themselves with ICE. You know, their job is to protect the community and to gain the community's trust.
Yeah, thank you. That's a really excellent answer, and then segues me perfectly into our final question. And one of my big concerns has been, the distrust that has been engendered with the immigrant community over the last 4 years, and we see this incredible collision going on in Santa Barbara, with our communities of color being at a rate of something like 9 times the infection rate for COVID than our other, our white community members. And that is just this classic collision of these two things happening. And this distrust, it's going to take a while to gain it back. But the final question is, what can we as Women's Fund members do to help our local immigrant population?
Oh my goodness. I think today's forum is a great start, right? Learn about the struggles our immigrant neighbors are facing locally. The next step should be to find out what immigrant serving organizations are doing locally, right? And support their work, show up at immigrant-led events like today's, right? Learn from immigrants and turn your concern into action.
That's wonderful. Thank you. It's a great answer. So in closing, we're going to put up on a slide now with the contact information for Julissa Pena and Immigrant Legal Defense Center. And also we have for Molly Kellogg, who's with Drivers Listo. They always need volunteers. So any of you who would be interested in learning more or want to volunteer your time to support ILDC's efforts. Also, for anyone wanting to go deeper on tonight's topics, we've compiled a really exciting reading list, which you can find on the Women's Fund website. I would like to extend my heartfelt gratitude to our video presenters, Maria and Gloria, and especially to Julissa and Clarabelle for your time and heart and insightful contributions. I also would like to thank the Women's Fund behind the scenes crew. There's a bunch of them, you guys. There's Linda, Jessica, Justin, Lauren, Mary, and Jamie, who've all volunteered countless hours to put this Grants in Action presentation together. Thank you to one and all. And finally, thank you to our generous business donors who help us maximize the size of our grants pool by supporting educational programs like this one. As a final thought, thinking about the Statue of Liberty and the torch she carries, I would just like to share the inspiring words of the U.S. Poet Laureate Amanda Gorman. For there is always light, if only we are brave enough to see it, if only we are brave enough to be it. Thank you and good night.